much for coming to our Peer Perspective series today. Today, we're going to be talking about HIE and hearing impacts. And I have two amazing panelists here with me, Katie and Kara, and they're going to be sharing their experience with their child. As always, this is not any medical advice. This is just a parent panel. So these are just parents in our Hope for HIE community sharing their personal experience. Please follow up with your providers, your physicians, anyone on your medical team for your child's specific needs. And for this specific panel, we are interviewing parents that are hearing parents. So this is just their perspective from the hearing community. So we definitely encourage you to reach out to the deaf and hard of hearing community as well to get their perspective. But in this specific series, we are doing the parent perspective, and it's different experiences that they have encountered through their journey with their child. And there are many more installments of our Peer Perspective series. So please head to our YouTube channel for more information. So I will let Katie and Kara do a little bit of an introduction for themselves, their child, and their journey with HIE and hearing, and then we'll get started.
Yeah, I'll get started. My name is Katie. I'm based in the Midwest here in the US. And my daughter was born in 2022, and she was born, I was 40 plus one, so she was born full term, but right at birth, I had an emergency C-section, and she was diagnosed with severe HIE. And so we spent a good amount of time in the NICU, both at two different hospitals. So one, our level 3 NICU that where she was born, and then we also got transferred to the Children's Hospital in the area. And I would say for the first couple weeks of her life, we were just focused on, I think what everyone's focused on, eating and breathing. So she was cooled like many HIE babies, and then rewarmed. And then it was really that focus on oxygen and breathing on her own, and then eating. And we did eventually get a G-tube at our Children's Hospital when she was about 5 weeks old. But then we'll talk more about it. But on our third and our fourth week, we did our first hearing test, which is when we discovered that she potentially had hearing loss.
I'm Kara, and I now live in the Midwest, but my son was diagnosed with hearing loss on the West Coast. And so most of my journey took place there. And my son with HIE is my eldest child. He's now 13. So it was 2010 when he was diagnosed with it. And at that time, the cold cap therapy was just being trialed. And we thankfully lived in the area where one of the few hospitals was trialing it. So we got to go through that process, and he was diagnosed with HIE level 2. And he did pass the newborn hearing screen. They did somehow complete that even with the NICU going on. I'm not sure how that happened, but he ended up failing. I'm sorry, he didn't pass the newborn hearing screen. He failed the newborn hearing screen. And so then we had to go back and do another test at 2 months old. Bear test, but he ended up having every kind of therapy that you can imagine for the first several years of his life, and he's now progressed beyond almost all of it, but the beginning years were definitely really difficult.
Thank you both so much for sharing. I can't wait to hear more about your experience, and I know this is going to be very helpful for so many families in our Hope for HIE community. So first, we're going to talk a little bit about your NICU experience, and if you could share a little bit about those early weeks and early months. And some of the things we'd like to hear about are the first hearing test in the NICU that both of you have talked about, explaining what the bear test is, and then what led to any follow-up testing, such as if your child failed the test or they weren't responding the way they had hoped in the test?
Yeah, so we, like I shared, spent about 5 weeks in the NICU, 4 weeks in one hospital and one in another. It's kind of a blur. I count like the NICU is a world of its own. My daughter was my first, and my only right now. And so we didn't know what to expect. And so it kind of felt like the world stopped outside, and we were living in the NICU day to day with her. We got our first hearing test when she was about 3.5 weeks old. And she was referred, which just means they didn't, either get enough data or they suspected some mild to moderate hearing loss, but weren't able to get really good data in the hospital. We did 2 to 3 of those hearing tests. In the NICU, she was spending a lot of time sleeping during the day because we were there. So we would hold her all day, and then she would be awake at night. So they also find it really difficult to get a nighttime, like a sleep hearing test with her. But from there, we just got referred to audiology based on that information. And so we were really lucky that our hospital system set up that appointment with us. So we had our first out of hospital audiology appointment around 2 months.
Yeah. My story's somewhat similar. So we, when he was born, he was immediately transferred to the hospital to have the cold cap therapy. So that was quite a ways from where we were at, but and he was in there for 10 days. And when he was on the cold cap, he did suffer seizures and that sort of thing. But at the end of that time, they did the newborn hearing screen and he failed it. So honestly, redoing the hearing test was a very low priority to me at that time, because we were suffering with trying to get him to sleep and eat, and that seemed much more important. But the pediatrician was adamant that we get him in. So at 2 months, we did take him in for the BEAR, which is stands for brainstem auditory evoked response, and it's done while the child is sleeping. They do sedate them, and they're not allowed to eat before the test for 2 hours, which is obviously a problem with a baby. So I don't remember all that we did to manage that, but I just remember all the EEGs and this hearing tests requiring no eating and no sleeping and different things were so difficult. But you go in and they sedate them somehow. I think they give them sugar water or something, and then they put headphones on the baby and they play tones while they're sleeping, and they can watch on the monitor how the brainstem is reacting to the sounds. And then once they finish that, they do another test called OTOAE, autoacoustic emissions test. And I don't really remember how they did that part, but they said in the report they were only able to complete half of my son's hearing test because he was waking up. So, but from that test, they said he can hear. And so you can just go about life like normal.
Sure, we had a really similar experience that we were, following our NICU discharge. We had many, many follow-ups. And so like you, audiology was the least of my concerns as we followed up with neurology and GI and, surgery. And so we also went in around 2 months. We did not do a sedated test. We did the ABR. And so my daughter could sleep, but getting a 2-month-old to sleep at a time that she wasn't used to sleeping was really challenging. I always tell people that audiology appointment, my husband was back at work, so I was the primary caregiver at the time, and it was probably the most stressful one. And so like we did big appointments like neurology and her G-tube, but audiology, I don't think I was expecting it to be difficult, and it was one of my more difficult tests. So we did the ABR, so she's supposed to be sleeping, but then all of the nodes on her head, headphones listening and trying to get her to sleep while trying to get her to eat while I was also breastfeeding at the time. And it ended up being like a 3 or 4 hour appointment. And so I just look back at that appointment of like, ooh, that's one I would have done differently. So I had wished at that time I would tell future parents, like bring someone with you so that you don't have to do it alone. I just think, and you're in this dark, tiny room where someone's on the other side trying to get this information from your child. And it was one of the more stressful appointments that I remember in those early days.
Yeah.
That's all very helpful information. And I know that a lot of our families will really find that information useful. So thank you both for sharing. To sort of piggyback off of what you both just talked about, would you mind sharing a little bit about your experience with navigating the audiology appointments when you have a booth test? So I know you already brought up bring someone with you. What about, if you have other children, what would your suggestions be? And then one thing I do want to point out to all of our Hope for HIE families is you do have access to Annie, our child life specialist with Hope for HIE. So she is very well versed in preparing for different types of appointments. So definitely reach out to her if you have a pending appointment for your child with audiology, because she can help you and your child prepare for that as well. And then anything else each of you would like to share about navigating the appointment and maybe some tips for new parents that are navigating that as well.
Yeah, so my daughter had her first booth test probably around a year, maybe a little bit before a year. And I think the thing that was most helpful was my audiologist as well as my birth to three team sent us some videos of what to expect in the booth. And so it was really helpful to be able to see like, okay, I know this isn't the exact booth we're going to be in, but at least I know where my daughter's going to be, where I'm going to be, where the audiologist is going to be. And that really helped me like bring down some of that anxiety. The other thing that I would say really helped me is my audiologist was honest with me and said, like, we might not get really good data from this. And so one thing that we know with booth tests is that like she's going to learn what we're expecting of her over time. And so this first one could just be it is what it is. And then we'll see you again in 3 to 6 months to do another one. And that was true. So I walked away from the first booth test with no new information about my daughter's hearing loss, but like we didn't, like we accomplished that first booth test. And so we weren't able to adapt our hearing aids or anything at all. But that second booth test, we saw a big difference. Like we were able to get a few more data points. And it was clear that she knew what she was supposed to be doing in the booth and like what we were looking from her. So it was really nice to be reassured that like this is a journey of hearing loss. It's not, go to this one appointment. And what I've learned in my connection with my audiologist is we've become very close as we get hearing molds fit very frequently. The hearing aid stops working, then we're going in, we're doing booth tests every, 6 to 12 months. And so just recognizing it's not a one-off, it's going to be this whole lifelong thing.
Yeah, I echo it's a journey. Definitely keep that in mind while you're navigating this. For me, my journey was very long and difficult. And we started doing booth tests at 2 years old. Even though he'd passed the bear test, I started noticing he wasn't responding to high-pitched noises like fire trucks and doorbells. He wasn't really responding to his name, especially if I said it. This what was very confusing. He could hear my husband, but not me. So it started to feel like selective hearing. I don't know. But and there were several other red flags to me, which I can talk about later. But so I took him in, and the first part of a booth test is to do a tympanometry, which is done outside the booth with the audiologist. They put something in the ears and it plays 226 hertz, like an air thing in their ear, and they watch how it bounces back with the eardrum, and they can tell the fluid and the pressure levels. And from that one test, they're supposed to be able to tell if your child probably has hearing loss. I was told that later when he finally got diagnosed, and his tests were abnormal from the beginning. So I'm not sure why I kept being told he doesn't have hearing loss, but they do that test first, and then they will do the booth test. And at 2 years old to about 4 years old, the booth test is not super reliable because they are not able to test individual ears. They're only testing whether they can hear. So they play a sound into the booth, and an animal on the side will light up when they look the way of the sound. And my child got really bored with this activity quickly. So they weren't able to finish the test, and they just tell you, come back again in 6 months. We can imagine if your child can't hear you and you're struggling to communicate at home, how difficult this is to wait 6 months and then to go through the same experience again, because again, it's still very boring, and even more boring, I think, the second time because they already did it 6 months ago. And it's just difficult. And all they can end up telling you is your child can hear something. And it's not super satisfying. When they get older, around 4 or 5, they will start to wear the headphones, and they will play sounds into each ear. And the task will be to put a toy into a bucket, which also is very boring. So my son never could finish those tests, and they only allotted 45 minutes for the entire experience. And it became a problem, just the length of time. And I'm like, could we please go longer? I'm sorry, we can't. And they just kept telling us to come back or to again do a sedated test. And because of my child's HIE, I did not feel comfortable redoing sedation when he had airway issues. And they also told me it's not as accurate as a booth test. So I said, I'm not going to do that. We will just keep trying the booth tests. We did in all 10 tests, either in a booth or as a hearing screen at the school or in different hospitals. And finally, a private clinic was able to diagnose it The other thing to know about the Booth test, if your child does not have a hearing loss diagnosed, they do not do a full hearing test. They do just spot points at the top of the audiogram, and they use that to determine if they should do more testing. That was not sufficient to determine my son's hearing loss. So these are all factors to really keep in mind if you really think your child has hearing loss and they keep telling you they're fine or they can hear something and you're still very concerned. I would go to a private clinic that can take more time to look into that. Also, I'd recommend for Booth tests to be sure to get someone to watch your other children. One parent is allowed into the booth with their child. So that means your other child will be alone in the other room with the audiologist, which is not a good idea. The audiologist needs to hear what's happening in the booth. And even if you brought another person with you to watch the child, they could still be too noisy and they'd have to leave the room. It's just not really practical. You can have two parents there, but only one goes in the booth, and really no other children should be there.
That's very helpful. Kara, if you don't mind going into a little bit, I know that you had a lot of hearing tests and then it was that one private clinic and some things that kind of transpired that helped you get that diagnosis. Do you mind just sharing a little more about that for those families that we're working with that may be in the same situation where they really feel like their child has hearing loss, but for whatever reason, they're not getting the data that they had hoped for?
Yeah. So like I said, we did 10 different tests, mainly because if he didn't have hearing loss and many had some other diagnosis, we were seeing severe delays in language and in social skills. And the diagnosis that is often confused with hearing loss is autism. So you cannot get an autism diagnosis without getting a hearing test and having them pass the hearing test. So you have to do it for that diagnosis. You also need it for other diagnoses like other language issues. So he was diagnosed with severe receptive and expressive language delays and with autism, and he was diagnosed with apraxia of speech. And this all transpired over several years because they could not test him accurately with his hearing. And at one point, they actually were thinking he had cognitive issues as well. So it's very important that you can rely on the hearing test. So I kept thinking it was a hearing issue. I even called before he went into kindergarten. I had decided this will be my last hearing test because we've done this so many times. I called the hospital and talked to the audiologist ahead of time and expressed my concerns and said, I don't think he's learning the test. I can tell when he's in the booth, he is not doing the activity correctly. He's, instead of putting the ball in the bucket, he's looking at me, and they would mark it as he heard the sound. That is not an accurate representation. He also was looking through the window at the booth, the audiologist, and could see when they were hitting a button. And that also, I could just see him figuring it out. And because he was not doing the test accurately, they should not be marking it off. Because he's just figuring it out. That's what a lot of kids with hearing loss, especially when they're older, they look at their peers and figure out what to do. So I called the audiologist before the last test and told her my concerns. I said, can we please reward him with stickers or a Skittle or something so he knows this is the correct behavior? She did it a little bit, but not completely. And he still didn't, in my opinion, did not do the test well. And she ruled that he had no hearing loss. 6 months later, he's in kindergarten. He's 6 years old. And I get a call from this elementary school teacher. And he's in an autism contained class. And she said, your son cannot hear. And I started laughing. I said, I know. I don't know what you want me to do about it. She goes, he keeps holding the toys up to his ear that are very loud. And all the other children are covering their ears. And he's trying to hear. And she said, you should go somewhere else. Don't go to the children's hospital, go somewhere else. So I found a private clinic and I told him my concerns. And he said, I promise I will figure it out. And we showed up and we tried to do the test, and again, my son had problems. And he said, you need to go home and practice. And you need to bang a pot or make a noise behind him. And when he does that, give him a Skittle and keep doing this every day for a week, and then come back and retake the test. So I did that. And when we came in, he was able to do the test accurately. And he said, your son has severe hearing loss. And I don't know how the other tests could miss severe hearing loss, but they did. And the problem is then at that point, you have to go back to the children's hospital to get retested, because private clinics will not do hearing aids for children. So I had to have them repeat the test. The difference is because they now knew he had hearing loss, they tested everything, and they tested him very differently, and he knew how to do the test now. So it really is important to find someone where you can have confidence in the test, because it completely changed his life. He doesn't have all these other diagnoses. He's in a regular gen ed classroom. He's able to do classwork at his level, and it's just changed his life. And if we had had that diagnosed earlier, he would not need so many supports now, because he missed the language development window. So he did not get diagnosed till he was 6.5 years old. And we started trying to get diagnosed at 2 years old. So.
Thank you for sharing all of that information. I know there's going to be other families that are going to need some guidance on this. So I really appreciate you going a little bit more in depth and sharing a little bit more detail about how you ended up with getting the information that you needed, so that other families that may be in a similar situation can try some of those. We're going to switch gears a little bit. And Katie, if you would give us, I know that you are navigating hearing aids or ears with your younger child. So if you would just sort of talk with us a little bit about how you've navigated working with that with a child, of a very young age, because obviously we're also going to have a lot of families who are going to be navigating that. And then also maybe share about some of the things, like how often you're going back for the molds, how you've made the decision, because I understand we're given 2 different hearing aid options. And then if you want to talk about, I know y'all are both US based, but just a little bit about the financial piece of that as well. Obviously we won't be able to go into any detail on international, but just a short brief about, if you are in the US, some of your options.
Yeah. So, unlike Kara, we were really lucky to get a diagnosis really early. So Renly was 2 months when we got her diagnosis of moderate hearing loss in both ears. But similarly, like there were 8 sounds that they were looking for, and we only got readings on 3 sounds to begin with, but they were confident to move forward with hearing aids from that point. So we had 2 choices of hearing aids, and at the time I still felt kind of dazed in our journey. And so they gave us the choice between battery and rechargeable. And I said, with our lifestyle, I think rechargeable is the best option. And so I just made the choice on the whim, but the thing that they told us was that once you choose a brand, stick with it. Like, you're going to want her to keep that brand her whole life, because she'll learn what it sounds like in this brand. And if you choose the other brand, it sounds different. So it might be difficult for her to switch in mid-age. So we made the choice. We also had to choose a color of hearing aid. And at the time I was like, she's 2 months. She doesn't have a favorite color. Like, I don't know what color to choose. But you also, in the US, we keep our hearing aids for 3 years. And so it also felt like a big decision of like, this is going to be on her for the next 3 years. But we wanted that going forward. I'm an educator by nature, so I was really interested in getting her hearing aids as soon as possible so that she could have access to that receptive language and impacting that expressive language too. But as you might imagine, getting a baby to wear hearing aids is, a thing of its own. But I think we were lucky that we were able to start early. And so, she first got her hearing aids around 4 to 5 months old. And so my partner and I were really good about putting them in at the start of every day. At that time, she wasn't yet pretty good about pulling them out. We wore a lot of bows at the time to kind of protect them in her ears. We've tried ear suspenders. We've tried the little clip on the back. For us, none of those really work for her. We just let her wear them as is. I always panic though. There are many times that I have lost one of them and had to like retrace my steps, like in my whole neighborhood, looking for this little piece of equipment that I always like. I'm like, this is one of the most expensive things in my house. Like, how can I lose it? But I think that's also just a reality of being a hearing aid wearing or a hearing aid parent. We call them her ears. And so we always say at the beginning of the day, let's put your ears in. We've also, I know we'll talk a little bit, like, are on a journey to learn ASL ourselves, to kind of, our birth to 3 team was really great around giving us options around language, right? Knowing that we weren't sure about the depths of her hearing loss at her time. So we didn't know if spoken, like, English language was going to be her L1. We decided to move forward with that, just not knowing, but also my partner and I decided we were going to learn ASL in case that was a journey that she wanted to be on. And so with her hearing aids, we always err on the side of, we're going to put them in once, we're going to put them in again if she pulls them out. And then the second time she pulls them out, we let her keep them out, knowing that as she ages, she'll be able to tell us if she wants them in or if she doesn't want them in. And we want to start to build that autonomy. And so if we say, we really want you to be able to hear us, let's put your ears in. And then if she tells us again, we allow her to take them out and then switch to the sign that we're learning. And we've been really lucky that my mom has also started to learn some ASL, and she feels really comfortable putting her ears in. I would say my mother-in-law is not as comfortable putting her ears in, so sometimes that can be a frustration. She's with her at least 1 day a week, and I usually come home and she's not wearing her ears. Whereas if I pick her up at her other grandma's, she does have her ears in, but that's just that route we have to take. We are going to start doing some daycare with other providers next year. And so that's definitely a concern of mine, of not only, not losing those really expensive ears, but then just ensuring they know how to put them in. But again, we're really lucky with our birth to 3 team, and they have already like a tip sheet on Renly and what her hearing is and what is good for her. And so we're hopeful to take that journey. I think the thing I didn't know about her hearing aids was how often we would have to get new molds. And so, you have to go in and get fit, and they're putting this, I don't even, like, goo in her ear as it hardens, it's pink. And so in her first year of life, we probably got 3 different molds fit. And so the first ones fit pretty good. And then as a new mom to, I was like, can I hear feedback? Like, you're always looking for feedback and seeing because she can't say like they're fitting or they're not fitting. It's just me making the call. And so I think I erred on the side of, she needs new ones. Like, let me just let an audiologist look at her at least. And then I feel like we've gotten better, and then I'm like, they don't fit, we need to go get fit. But sometimes that's frustrating too, because by the time I make the call that they don't fit, then we have to wait to get into audiology, and then it's another 6 weeks until the ear molds come back. But overall, I would say we've had a pretty positive experience with using her ears. We have not actually officially lost them, even though we've searched for them many times. But I would recommend, our audiologist said, most, like, if you're older, people will get their hair colored. And at the time I had a bald baby, so I was like, well, I don't know what color her hair is, so that's difficult to say. But they said then choose a bright color that, like, if it's on your carpet or if it's on, the floor, you'll be able to spot it right away. So we chose like a bright blue, and it has been helpful. So
my son still likes bright colors. He has blue hearing aids, so
I love it.
yeah. And for us, when your child is school age, you get hearing aids every 5 years, and the molds are twice a year until they're about my son's age now, 13. Then now they're once a year. And we were not given an option, and I think a large part of that is because for school age, they have extra technology that you don't need as babies, and it's called a boot. And it's about this long. It goes on the end of the hearing aid, and it will connect to the FM system that is used in the schools. So we only were given the choice of Phonak for that. And I know once they reach 18 and they get their next set of hearing aids, it will be different technology then. They'll take the boot off and they'll connect it to the hearing coil that's in universities and in churches. So that's one of the things I didn't know when I was like, there's all the technology changes. It's not just a hearing aid. They fit it for whatever the child needs. We also were given an FM remote mic. I don't know if they give that to babies. They do. Okay, it's cool. So that was free. They just gave it to us to use we don't really use it at home. It doesn't work super well in the car, but he does use it at church. He gives it to the lead teacher, and that kind of, when he does soccer, he does that. He wears his hearing aids all the time, except when he's swimming or sleeping or in the shower. And also, if you do amusement park rides, do not wear your hearing aids. I have a horror story of a friend whose son lost them on Space Mountain, and they had to shut the whole ride down. So they will fly off. So just take them up, make sure you always bring a case to put them in. especially like at the beach, because then you get sand, like it can be a nightmare. So, and that's another reason why we use ASL, because there's times when he doesn't have his ears in and we have to be able to communicate for safety reasons. So, yeah, I think that's most of the stuff for our hearing aids. Yeah.
That's great. We will in just a second talk a little more about your experience with ASL, but before we do that, I wanted Kara, if you could just talk a little more about, obviously we can only speak from the US school system perspective, but what are some tips that you would give parents that are navigating the school system with their elementary or even middle school child that you find if, someone had given that recommendation to you, that would have been very helpful?
So the first thing I want to say is hearing loss is a whole different beast from other disabilities, and I didn't know that because we started the school journey with just other disabilities, and I thought we could work within the school system that we were currently in with every disability. And as soon as we got that diagnosis, we were told that wasn't possible. So that was a big shock to me. The reason is because it's a low incidence disability. So blindness and deafness are the schools are allowed to say, we do not have the ability to serve your child. You need to take them somewhere else. Not every child is told that. It really depends a lot on when they were aided and their ability, how severe their hearing loss is and other things. But because of my son being diagnosed so late, they said he really did not have much English language. He was at a 3-year-old level at 6.5 years old. So they said, you need to put him in an ASL only program. We were not really given an option. So that was ASL only programs, or they're like deaf ed programs that are housed in public schools. There's usually one per county, or maybe two if you're lucky, if it's a large county. So they are usually an hour or two away from wherever we are. So it's a very long bus ride for a first grader. And he was on the bus for 4 hours a day. And he would be crying every day. That was a factor to take into consideration. So my son only was in the deaf program for 6 months, and then they pushed him out. He progressed that quickly. So there's also, in the States, there is an option of a state deaf school, and those are residential schools where your child will live away from you and be there all week and then come home on the weekend. And even young children can do this. So, and this all is usually determined by the language your child needs at the educational setting. So if they need 100% ASL, usually they will push them to the deaf school. Because some counties don't have deaf programs housed in a public school. So you have to just be aware of all the options out there. And you really need to find a specialist who can evaluate your child, because as hearing people, we really don't interpret our child's behavior correctly. I missed so many cues that he was struggling, but as soon as they brought in a deaf specialist and they watched him, they said, he does not know what's going on. He's looking around, copying people. He's confused. And I was like, I didn't even know. And he can fool regular special ed teachers. So it's really important you advocate for them to be tested by a deaf specialist. And there's usually one in every state here. I don't know about other countries. And then there's even some in your school district. There's usually a deaf specialist of some kind that is a contract worker. So my son, we utilized so many different options, but that was one of the things we used. Is we used the deaf specialist to come and help him with American Sign Language. She taught him in the summer before he had to start school, and really worked well with him in that way. Did you want me to go into the accommodations at school, just in general?
You can give a few of them because we're getting a little short on time, but I know you utilized an ASL interpreter at school.
Yeah,
Okay.
because of where we used for some time. Right now, he's not using one. the main ones are an FM system, preferential seating. They can be given extra time to process information, having closed captions. He gets notes from a teacher before the class so he can read them. He gets pre-taught vocabulary. Listening breaks, they give him special lunch times too, because the lunchroom is super loud. So they go, and he gets to have like once a week and have lunch in a special room with friends. So he can have that conversation. So just really to think about when you're thinking of goals, like the entire day, and what accommodations they can need, and for testing too, he gets extra time. And yeah, and then also the other one I wanted to emphasize was teacher training. So there's a lot of things that can't be put in the IEP, but the teachers need to know, like, for example, they shouldn't be talking to when they're facing the whiteboard because the sound bounces back and they can't hear and they can't see their mouth. They also need to, when students are answering questions, our kids can't hear the students, they're not mic'd, and they don't know where the sound is coming from. So the teacher needs to, one, say the student's name so the deaf kid can look at them. And secondly, they should repeat their answer into the mic. These are things that are not natural for hearing teachers, and they really need someone to train them. It should not be up to our child to be telling them, I need you to do this. So you need to, hopefully there is someone you can contact near you who works for the school district who can teach them and go and help them. If not, then it will be on your shoulders as a parent to advocate for your child and to ask to go in and train the teachers.
Thank you. And then the last couple things I want to talk about before we close and open it to our small group setting is just discussing ASL, how you've used it. I know, Katie, you have experience with it with early intervention, and then also connections with the deaf and hard of hearing community, such as mentors and guides. So if y'all will just share a little bit about that, and then I will close us out with some last resources.
Yeah, so we got connected with Birth of Three really quickly, and in where I'm from, like I said, we choose an L1, and so that person for us was expressive and receptive English, but then we also expressed interest in ASL, and so about once a month we get to meet with an ASL teacher. He's a deaf individual, and so he does a little bit of both, of coaching me and my partner on continuing to use signs that are appropriate in the home, as well as interacting with my daughter and prompting us to use some sign with her. And then we've tried to take advantage of some other opportunities. So where I'm from has a really good deaf hard of hearing network. And so we've taken some classes through them, some Zoom classes. And then I live in a pretty big city in the Midwest. And so we have access to a really good community college, and they offer ASL classes. And my Birth to Three team shared that with us. So my husband and I are both taking that. And then we also have some play groups that we were able to take advantage of, some other families with hearing loss. Both our Birth to Three teacher who does expressive and receptive language, as well as our ASL teacher, lead that play group. And so they're able to give us some tips and tricks and around ASL. We also have, as we're both learning, there are ASL signs up all around our house, just like little pictures, so that we can continue to include them in our vocabulary. And yeah, I feel like that's how we've been kind of trying to get ourselves up to speed.
Yeah, it's ideal to start when they're young and don't start when they're 6.5. They're supposed to already have a whole language. It's really hard. So I do want to make everyone aware that as soon as your child is diagnosed with hearing loss, they're automatically a member of the deaf community. And deaf as in big D, it's means culturally. And we have to decide as parents what role we want that to play in our family. I do find it essential to include them because I just cannot understand things from their perspective. And so they're really helpful in guiding me on decisions like, where do you do driver's ed training? Like, how do you do job interviews? We need help like with alarms in our house. What do you do with like doorbells? Like all these different things. I don't know. Where do you get these resources? You can get a video relay system free for your children. They're the ones who tell me this. It's also important. My son really once you get to elementary age, you really start to notice you're different than other kids. And it became hard for him, and he really needed that connection to know there are other kids out there like me. And for him, that was the hearing aids. He wanted to know other people with hearing aids. So we joined a hearing aid support group at the Children's Hospital. We also, there were obviously, even if you don't go to the school that has the deaf program, you can join after school. They have after school activities for these kids to have their community. You can join that. We also joined a deaf church for several years, which was a really interesting experience. I recommend trying that. And they also have deaf camps. So you can either send your child to one, or they have ones for the entire family. And they have ones that are geared towards ones who use sign and ones who don't use sign. So you can just pick your path. There's also other communication options besides ASL. There's cued speech, which uses hand gestures around this area to show what sounds you are making. And there's signed exact English, which is signing words in English order. And some families choose to do that as well. In our country, the ADA has ruled that it is the family's choice what language our child uses because it's a disability. So we can choose for school what language we want our child educated in. That is our right. So I just want you to feel empowered to make the choice that's right for your family. I recommend Hands and Voices website very highly. They're in almost every state. They have mentors you can get, and they also have parent guides, and they have advocates who can come to your IEP meetings and help. And I really recommend that because schools don't fully understand this disability, and they will tell you a lot of things that aren't accurate. So I recommend always having an advocate with you. And also lifeprint.com has free ASL lessons for families. And on YouTube, there's a lot of deaf schools post videos and they read stories and things. Those are the best. So I love Rocky Mountain Deaf School on there. They're amazing videos, all free. I ended up taking classes at the community college, but that's because we had to learn it so quickly. And yeah, and anyway, it's really a journey. I would just also encourage any siblings to also learn. I did make my daughter learn it too, because that one of the statistics is 90% of siblings end up separated when they're adults from their deaf sibling because they can't communicate. So I really want to fight that statistic. So I made her learn, but it's really a whole family activity. So.
Thank you both so much for sharing today. I just want to share a few more resources before we close the recorded section. We've talked a little bit about just coping with hearing loss as a family, where to find support. And I just want to remind everyone to please utilize the resources at Hope for HIE. I'm available to help. Annie is a fantastic resource, our child life specialist. We have support groups, we have Facebook groups, so please reach out for any resources you may need. And I just want to thank Katie and Kara so much for sharing their family's journey with HIE and hearing impacts. And we just thank everybody for joining us today in our Peer Perspective series. And please follow up with all of our other videos on our YouTube channel. Thank you.